So great to have so many of you here, and today is a special treat in the third of our series. One of my just absolute favorite composers and arrangers to program. If you have been to Corvallis Repertory Singers concerts in the past, then you may recognize this name. If you're a singer, then you for sure recognize this name. And if you're a conductor, as several of the people on this broadcast are, then you rely on these awesome arrangements that Dan does to be singable for our choirs and always beloved by our congregations and our audiences and so forth. So a big wave and a thank you to Dan Forrest, who should be on your screen at some place. Say hi, Dan, so you pop up.
Hello there. Welcome to Speaker View.
It's great. Hey, Dan and I share a little bit of history, not very much. Dan has his DMA, or is it a PhD or DMA at the University of Kansas? Yeah, I'm of course a Kansas boy, but I did much of my education out of Kansas, and Dan is a Jayhawk and Rock Chalk Jayhawk. I grew up a K-State fan, so we'll try not to let that get between us.
Yeah.
If the subject turns to basketball, though, it might not go well.
Yeah, right. If it turns to football, it might not go well for me. So
Oh well, the
you guys should
Beavers
do
we're,
well.
we're we're getting a little better. Yeah, Florida State. Well, not right now. Not even Florida State. Well, I thought, to start this conversation, we already have a question in the chat. We have some aspiring composers and arrangers, and I thought this would be a great way for us to just get started talking. Richard writes, do you start with the words or melodies and then arrange your gorgeous compositions? Or, how do you, when you're thinking about arranging a piece of music, and we're probably thinking more arranging right now than composition, but you can pivot on that if you want. What do you start with? Do you start with text or do you start with the tune?
If I'm arranging, it's more equal parts both. If it's composing, then I'm always starting with text, always text first. I'm not the songwriter type that does the opposite order. For arranging, though, what I write has to be true to both, and I want it to feel like it just naturally emerges from what was already there. So there's a lot of thinking about the melody and thinking about what new garb I can put it in, if I can put it that way. How can I dress it up in 21st century clothing as opposed to whatever century it may have been written in? But at the same time, I have to do that in a way that is still true to the text, so that when you're singing the text to that tune in that setting, it still feels organic and natural and like it belonged and like it was there all along, just waiting to be done. So it's tricky to make those distinctions between words versus melody, because the nature of what we do is to pull those together. So I realize there has to be a starting point somewhere, but I'm never really looking at one apart from the other when I'm arranging. So long story short, both.
And just to note to our listeners, we're in the chat. If you want to write a question in there, I promise to try to include it in our conversation at some appropriate time. And you can send it directly to me, or you can put it where everyone sees it. It's all good. Christmas carols, which is the official topic of today, because we are officially in the season here, less than 2 weeks to Christmas Day. I mean, people have a lot of opinions about Christmas carols. I mean, how do you go about how do you go about setting a Christmas carol in a way that's special, but not stupid, right? Doesn't violate what they love.
Yeah, there has to be some measure of judgment on my part, I suppose, in that I want to write something that feels true to the words, true to the music, and yet feels like it's true to myself in that artistic sort of way. Like it's authentically what I would say about that carol. It's musical language that is me. I'm speaking my own language, not trying to speak some language that is not mine. And then it just has to be something I'm willing to feel proud of. And honestly, most of the ideas I come up with, I wouldn't feel proud to put out there. So 99% of what I write ends up getting deleted or pushed off in a drafts file somewhere and not ever used. But I'm always looking for that little needle in a haystack that feels like it's worth developing into a piece, and that I'm willing to own and publicly put my name on, put it out there.
So is the well-known carol easier? Like, "O Come All Ye Faithful," which I think your arrangement is brilliant at that. Or would you prefer to take the carol that most people have never heard of, except for carol aficionados?
Yeah. I'm happy to do both, really, and I've done a fair amount of both. I think it is harder to arrange the well-known ones, partly because there are so many arrangements already. Sometimes it feels like probably what could be done with this piece has been done, and I don't have something
Mm.
new to contribute. And then partly there's just kind of a reverence for those. There's usually a reason that those pieces have lasted so long and are so well known and loved. And honestly, there's a fair amount of fear and trepidation for me approaching those pieces and trying to find some language to speak or way to color them that's going to be appreciated and not just untrue to the piece or just irksome. Silent Night you were playing at the beginning there. I don't know how many people have said to me, I saw that you had arranged Silent Night, and I thought, does the world really need one more Silent Night? And I don't blame them. I mean, I thought the exact same thing. I wanted to find some unique way to put that across, and honestly, 5 or 6 years of Christmas seasons I spent looking for some idea for Silent Night, and just didn't have anything new to add, didn't have anything to say. And then whenever that was, I guess 2 Christmases ago now, we were already in the Christmas season, and I was in my. I remember the moment. I was in my backyard hauling firewood that I had chopped up, uh, and I just was walking along with an armload of wood, and all of a sudden I just started thinking about. I mean, I was thinking about the text and the tune as we know it, but those slowly ascending quarter notes, just really, really simply, just started floating in. Um, and then the idea of love's pure light beams from your holy face with the dawn of redeeming grace. I thought, yeah, there's almost a sense of like light beaming there with these kind of gradually ascending lines. And so it just sort of made sense. And I think I just stopped in the middle of my lawn in the backyard and thought about the counterpoint and yeah, would that fit with that? And this could go there. And I just probably stood there. If anybody was watching, I probably looked really silly. And I thought, I think that could work. So I threw down my armload of wood on the pile and quit hauling wood and went inside and wrote it down. And then spent, I don't know, a month or two, finessing all the counterpoint and making sure things lined up and worked right and getting the pacing right and the tempo, how many beats in that bar and how many bars in this interlude and all that kind of stuff to make sure it feels right. But it took me 5 or 6 years to find an idea that I thought, oh yeah, I think that could work. And I think I want to put this out there. I think this is a worthwhile contribution to the repertoire.
Do you have kind of a list of carols that you feel? I mean, you write a lot of music that's not carols, and carols is kind of our topic today,
Sure.
and it's a fun topic because it's narrow, right? I mean, it's kind of a discrete area. Do you have a list of carols that you feel like, yeah, I wanna do an arrangement at that at some point? And is there a list?
Oh, there
And
used
what's
to
on
be.
it?
I've done most of them now.
Yeah, I guess
Yeah,
so.
most of the ones that were on my list. So there are. I've commissions for 3 right now that I don't know when they'll happen. Um, and actually, all 3 of those commissions I negotiated open due dates, so that I don't have to rush something in and just I got to do something with this, and I hate that feeling.
Yeah.
So I mean, earlier on in my career, I couldn't get away with saying, "Is it all right if I give this to you when I give it to you? When I'm done, I'll give it." But I'm at the point now where I could be a little more demanding like that and say, it'll be better for both of us if you just let me take the time I need, and when it's right, I'll do it. So the list is short now, I guess you could say. But we'll see when those happen.
Well, the great thing about Christmas music is people want to hear carols or choirs at Christmas, and so it's kind of a key moment of the year for choirs. But on the other hand, when you write repertoire for the holiday season, it has a pretty narrow performance uh, length possibility. I mean, there's a couple weeks, maybe. I mean, maybe anything after Thanksgiving, but but you have to write it when? I mean, you're writing this music in June or May?
No, in terms of publication schedule,
Yeah.
I'm often I need to have a piece done by probably mid-January so that it can be engraved and
Oh,
recorded and stuff in the spring, so that then it's in production and ready to
yeah.
go by the end of spring when choirs start the summer buying season for the fall. If it's for a commission, of course, then the due date is usually somewhere between late summer and mid fall, depending on how much time people want. So most everything that I write is commissioned, and then I publish it after that. So I'm usually trying to finish Christmas pieces by late August or September sometime, maybe into October. So in those cases, yeah, sometimes it is June. In the
Yeah.
case of Silent Night, that wasn't commissioned up front. I got sponsorship
Mhm.
for the piece eventually, but I was just writing that because I wanted to. So that kind of came to me during the Christmas season. I actually had a couple of violin players play a violin duet version as the prelude to our church's Christmas Eve service that year. I guess that was 2018. We had loads of visitors and a totally packed auditorium, and nobody even listened to it. It was kind of funny. I think this piece could be really good, and so we played it, and everybody was just chattering away and really excited. And I was like, I'd like to think something special is happening here, and nobody realizes it.
Well,
But then I
that's
did
our
the choral version later, and then people know it now, so I'm thankful.
yeah, that's part of our life. People don't always pay attention when we're making music. That's something we get to do. Are there any carols that you have discovered in your work that other people have not said? That you were like, this is, I mean, obviously it exists, but it's not one that it has three or four arrangements on Pepper.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um,
Um, Yeah, maybe one good example would be "What Strangers Are These," which is on the new album that's out.
that's right.
That's not a well-known carol at all,
I
but
didn't know it at all.
such a lovely little text. It's just so close and heartfelt and intimate. Thus, the use of guitar and flute on there, it just feels kind of folksy and at home and comfortable in its own skin. Um, we really like that. Those typically don't sell as well because people aren't attracted. What strangers? Why is that in the title? You know, and it probably gets overlooked some. People would rather see Hark the Herald or something. But I think that's just such a lovely, lovely little text. I go a while without hearing that, and then it'll come back, and I'll be like, "Oh yeah, I forgot about that." I love that little thing.
Hey, so part of, I mean, I would assume that part of your desire is that, to bring more music into the repertoire, so that we're not just doing
Yeah.
Silent Night and Away in the Manger. But you're right, there are realities in terms of sales and so forth.
Yeah, I try not to be totally motivated that way. I mean, I can't ignore it, but at the same time, I don't want to be just a completely like market-driven composer, if I can put it that way. There's a sense of I just want a balance between doing things that lots of people want to do, but also just writing the pieces that I am inspired by and feel interested in, or just kind of filling out my personal list or catalog, whatever you want to say, of pieces that I've written. And sometimes that means just doing something smaller or shining a light on something that wasn't as well known, or setting a text that people don't know. So yeah, just good balance there, I think, is important.
Mike McAnally just put the link. In fact, that's what I was doing while Dan was talking about that. I was getting the Spotify link, and when I got in the chat, there it was. So, if you want, you can copy and paste that out. You can also click on it, but it'll start playing it for you during our broadcast. We'd love for you to stay with us. But it's 11 tunes in there. They're just beautiful. Some of my most very famous Dan Forrest carols are in that, and it's just beautiful. I spent the hour before this broadcast just listening to that again, and got me in the mood. I'm
Yeah.
feeling very Christmassy, and it's true. It's a mixture of ones that you will know and ones that you won't. Let's talk about this group because I don't really know much about them. Who are the Beckenhorst singers? It's an awfully pretty sound they're making.
Yeah, the Beckenhorst Singers is just kind of a name we make up for, here's the secret, a name we make up for studio singers in Indianapolis
It's,
who Beckenhorst records demos with twice a year. We've been recording there since I think 2003, so it's been probably 17 years ish, except for this year. Um, and there's a good sized roster there. They're close to IU, they're close to Butler, and there's a lot of people there that aren't necessarily connected with academia either. But they have a good sized roster of singers who are just on call for the studio. But there's kind of a core group of them that we usually use, and the contractor there knows who we like to record with, so we get kind of that same core sound each time. So each recording on there is technically a slightly different group of people, and if you listen carefully, you can almost tell that. But there is kind of a core sound. We always listen to a little bit of a previous recording before we start, just to kind of get back to where we're trying to go. Just fantastic musicians. They go in there and sight read and just sing like there's no tomorrow. And I accompany, and Craig Courtney conducts, and we don't rehearse. And Craig and I don't even really like talk through the pieces much in advance. We just kind of give a little tempo and a downbeat, and we all feel it together in the moment. And I'd like to think that adds a little bit of magic to those recordings, because we really are all just sort of discovering the piece together. But we're all at a level of musicianship where just we go through a time or two and then lay it down. It's
Yeah,
really fun.
I wondered if it wasn't, because the connection to Beckenhorst is what
Mm,
made me think it was. That's probably what it was.
mhm.
But I don't know that I've ever seen a publishing company put out a recording and make that available. Usually, it just pops up as a link for us to listen to when we're thinking about a piece. Is that a new idea? Have you done this before with that company?
Only this year, as we've been brainstorming, looking for new ways to generate revenue, honestly. Yeah, I mean, those are recordings that were done for the purpose of just helping people hear
Sure.
the carols to begin with. But then we just compile the very best ones. And
You should.
we put so much work into making those sound the very best that we can. That lots of people have said to me, like, why isn't your music on Spotify? Why aren't those Beckenhurst recordings on Apple Music? I'm like, well, I guess we could get
See,
them on there. Duh.
I, I think you've totally nailed something, because I mean we've always heard these recordings. They're just fine. They're created for us to be able to hear them, to think about them. But if you brought that to the next level and made that not a group, because I recognize that those singers are hired specifically for that task, but that's not unusual with choirs like that. And I think there's some interesting ideas for you to put out recordings for people to hear, for more than just hearing it on the publishing website.
We've done three other of those compilation albums this fall. One is just a collection of sacred anthems. One is more folk music based. There's a lot of more, a little bit of bluegrass and spiritual arrangements, that kind of stuff on there. A great variety of things that are all just a little more folk based. And then there's one that is also, what is the third one? Oh, the third one's a little more high churchy. There's a lot of brass and organ, and just a
Cool.
more formal feeling, some
Yeah.
Helvey kind of pieces on there. Um, so yeah, all three of those plus this Christmas one now are on those streaming sites, and we're hoping to do more in the future.
Yeah, I'm going to look for it. I thought it was a great recording. I thought it was worth listening to on its own merit, and I think we'll play it in our house. So one of my favorite tracks on there is the "See Amid the Winter Snow." I think I've conducted it 4 or 5 times. I've done it with my church choir, and I've done it with Corvallis Repertory Singers, and we've done it with the combined OSU choirs. So I keep just it sort of rotates around in my various groups. I think it's beautiful. I teach it to the university choirs through solfege, which
Yeah.
I get real good exact intonation. It's easy to do. Um, is that an original carol? I mean, is that an original or was that a carol?
No, that's an existing carol. It's the hymn tune there. It's
Okay.
Humility by John
Yeah.
Ross. Yeah,
Yeah. So
I wish
I
I could lay claim to having written that tune.
it's a beautiful melody. I
Yeah.
didn't know it. So that's great. Have you written at all have you translated this into like vocal work outside of the choral world?
For like vocal solos, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, several of my anthems are available in vocal solo collections that we've done. Um, I believe the first Noel and this one as well are in the most recent vocal solo collection that we put out at Beckenhorst. It's 5 of my pieces and 5 of Craig Courtney's. And I think they're both in there.
And I mean, it works so well for you because you already have these. I mean, first of all, you're a pianist. I mean, that was one of your early things.
Mhm.
And I mean, your piano accompaniments are always just they're playable, which means it doesn't take. I mean, a good pianist can play your accompaniments, but they're also beautiful and they're expressive. The interludes you write are always always sweeping. It's really great. I'm glad to hear that. So when you begin to imagine arrangement, this is a question out of the chat. I think it's a great question. Do the instruments you want include to help shape what you do with the vocal arrangement, or do you write all? Do you write like the choral arrangement and maybe a piano part, and then think about translating that into orchestration? Because I do think your orchestrations are expressive.
Yeah, so uh, it's all so closely related there, and every piece is a little bit different. Um, there are some pieces where I know up front I'm writing this piece for a string quartet and choir, and I have a percussionist. And then there are other pieces that are more open-ended, where the instrumentation evolves as the piece evolves. So it just kind of depends on the piece. But I'm always thinking beyond the piano. I mean, at the piano, I'm thinking orchestrally and trying to play along lines like a wind player would breathe them, or like a string player would bow them, or I'm always trying to think in color beyond just what the keyboard can do. So
Right.
a lot of times that just translates into actually using those instruments. And my doctorate was at the University of Kansas with James Barnes, who choral people don't know his name at all. But wind band people, like their face lights up when you mention his name. And he just taught me so much about scoring and instrumentation, and how the instruments work and how they work together, and building sound and blend and that kind of thing. Um, it was so good for me, and I never could have done things like the Requiem or Jubilate Deo with all that instrumentation,
Hmm.
or even just the way that I write for these smaller, just miniature anthems. Um, it's all so influenced by him. He just got me thinking in color that way, and taught me how to do it.
Well, I always need really good carols with orchestration.
Mhm.
So keep orchestrating them because we have the performance at the university with the orchestra and choir the
Yeah.
beginning of December, not this year. And so I think you've been, there's been a fair amount of Mac Wilberg on that as well,
Yeah, sure.
uh, who also will arrange and orchestrate them really beautifully. But I think you've been on almost every performance for quite a while. The director of the orchestra, Marlon Carlson, was after me to get you to commission a piece. He liked the "O Come All You Faithful" so much,
Oh
so
yeah, super.
that that caught his ear. So let's talk a little bit more about carols. I think what I'd like to know is, are there any carols that not everyone loves Christmas music, right? Do you have any pieces on your cringe carol list?
Yeah, this one. All that chromaticism. That's just not me at all.
Not a
The
romantic.
thing is, I set myself a challenge when I find a carol that I just don't like, of arranging it in such a way that I will like it. So the
Oh,
two that
there you
I've done
go.
that way are Angels from the Realms of Glory,
Okay.
and O Little Town. Angels from the Realms didn't have that
Oh.
just chromaticism. I don't know. I've just never, like, when I was a kid, I remember singing Christmas carols in church and at school. And every time it was like, oh, we're going to sing Angels from the Realms, I'd be like, oh, really? Like, there's so many carols we could sing, and you chose that one.
So why do you think it had such a bad spot with you?
I don't
A
know.
traumatic childhood moment with that carol?
I don't know. I can't put my finger. I mean, the chorus said the refrain has a lot of potential with the imitation and the kind of sequencing that goes on. Um, Maybe it was the disjunct melody, the leapy bum 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 bum. Maybe that just felt hard to sing. I think I grew up singing it kind of slowly too, and it was just kind of a
Oh,
dirge.
it's
So
got to
it was,
go. Angels from. Oh,
it was just
oh, you. That feels like my church, what I grew
yeah,
up in, right
yeah,
there.
yeah, right.
I tell people that the nice lady who played hymns at my church on the piano, she was able to turn any meter into a compound meter. You know, a mighty fortress, he is our God. It didn't matter. It took me years before I figured out. I was like, wait a minute, she's playing this in 6/8. I might have been in fifth or sixth grade before I realized that none of the things I was reading out of the hymnal matched up to what she was playing.
That's,
It went through some compound meter filter and came out.
yeah,
So
well, that
country church in Kansas. So
that may have just given her a little more time to find the next note too, if you're subdividing in threes instead of twos. Like,
Uh, Oh, little town of Bethlehem's interesting to me. Let me play just a tiny little bit of this for
Sure.
folks. Um, I'll start it at the beginning, and I think because what you said was kind of interesting. I think it's a much different piece than a different kind of arrangement than a lot of yours that I've done.
Yeah. Do you want me to set it up for you before you start it?
What? Yeah, set it up. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I had a couple goals with this. One was to just get rid of the chromaticism. And of course, that can be done really beautifully. If it's a British choir singing that in a cathedral, that's the most
Yeah.
beautiful lower chromatic neighbor ever. But in my church growing up, it was not, right? So I wanted it to feel, as I looked at the text, I thought I want the overall nature of the piece to reflect two things. One, just the closeness of like this little town, that it's a little place where probably everybody knows everybody, and it's not epic. You don't go there to get lost. Like, you're seen, you're known, and you're close. So I wanted it to have a sense of closeness and intimacy about it. And then there's also this, like, the hopes and fears of all the years, like all of human history, are met in the tonight. So there's this like huge historical weightiness to it, at the same time that there's this like little tiny, oh, little Bethlehem, really? Both of those. So what you hear in the introduction then are two different themes. One that feels just like we're turning back the pages of history, which is,
Right.
for me, that somehow conjures up a little sense of like turning back the pages and like looking back through time in some way. And then the second little theme that is also part of the intro represents just that close little Bethlehem feel.
Yeah.
And it's close and it's folksy and it's all there.
Yeah.
And
It's almost pop like. Yeah.
Yeah.
So did you conceive what did you think the soprano sax was that the original instrument you thought about in that? Because you
It
give a
was.
choice in your piece. It's soprano sax or clarinet or
Yeah, there's clarinet if you don't have a soprano sax. I'm just being pragmatic there, but I really prefer the soprano sax. It's a little
that's what I
bit of
want.
a jazz feel. Yeah, for sure.
So I think it's unusual.
Yeah,
I
I haven't written one for soprano sax before.
I used the soprano sax last Christmas at church. I think our pastor, she loved that. She was totally. I think I gave her the choice. It was Christmas Eve, and I said, "So soprano sax, little jazzy, or
Yeah,
clarinet," and she was like, "No, no, soprano sax all the way."
yeah,
So
good.
that's
Rock
what we
on.
had. Can I play them a little bit of that just so they can hear what you're talking about?
Yeah, and then when you listen, you'll hear what I did instead of trying to camouflage it and not like make you feel violated or like, oh no, he changed it. But it just feels like, whoops, I guess we didn't have that little chromatic note, did we?
I love that. Here we go. A little bit of right at the beginning.
So there go the stars.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a 6 minute piece, so I didn't want to play too much. But
Yeah.
everybody, go listen to it. Did you hear how the soprano sax does that? Boo, whoa, whoa! I mean, it's just it is, I think, and for we do a 11 o'clock service, so it's kind of a midnight service,
Mhm.
and the lights are off and all the candles are on, and it is such a beautiful chill carol for that setting.
That's great to hear. Yeah, I'm glad. It's actually a little bit of
So
Schubert. But you get it to a
nice.
soprano sax and it feels jazzy.
That's a good point. I wouldn't have heard that. That's awesome. So tell me about secular carols. Have you arranged any, or are they not carols if we call them secular carols? Christmas
Yeah,
songs.
I'm not going to wade into that debate. I've heard Rudder say that it's not a carol unless it like tells the entire gospel story, which
Oh,
really rules
oh,
out a whole
oh,
bunch of things. And I think that's what,
Jesus has to die. Yeah.
yeah, there's kind of a narrower definition of a true carol. And I haven't found that documented anywhere. I'm not sure where he got that, or maybe I misheard it or misunderstood it. I
It
don't
could
want
just be
to wade into
John.
that. Yeah,
Do
I
you,
don't.
do you like any of those songs? I don't know that I've seen anything. Have you been?
Like secular Christmas pieces, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that I don't think I've arranged any of them. I tend to just do the more sacred side of Christmas, I think. I like
Yeah.
them. They play all Christmas season in our house.
Yeah. Well, so even though you haven't arranged it, if you were going to arrange one, what's one you like?
Um, Boy, by this time, I've been listening to them for 3 weeks or something since Thanksgiving, and they're all just starting to get a little old. So there's not one that comes right to mind. Like, oh yeah, I
Yeah.
love that one. There are a few, but they quickly wear out if we're not careful.
They do wear out, yeah. Do you, when you are arranging a carol, do you just kind of go your own way, or do you kind of check out and listen to what other people have done? Not for inspiration so much, but to sort of stay out of their lane.
Yeah, good question. I do want to stay out of other people's lanes, but for me, the best way to do that is to not listen to what they've done.
Yeah,
Um, it, I'm always listening carefully and critically and analytically. So anything that I put in, it's going to be in there. Sooner or later, it's going to come out in the stew. And I'm pretty careful about what I take in, and I don't listen to a lot of like my choral colleagues who I work with and love. I don't necessarily listen to a lot of the music because I don't want to be feeding that in. I'm trying to find my own way, find my own ideas. There are
yeah.
times when people ask me to arrange something where I do know somebody else's setting. The worst example for me was First Noel. I really wanted to arrange First Noel, but I knew Mac Wilberg's, and that his is so beautiful that I almost just couldn't even write mine. I didn't think there was anything else to be said.
His is a perfect arrangement because he managed to not do anything to it special, but it was still really good. I mean, it's not
So
weird or strange. That little key change he does at
yeah,
that for the last verse, that's really I think that's brilliant. I mean, it might be just piece of cake for him, but
well,
I've done that a lot.
anytime a hymn or a carol doesn't start on scale degree one, it kind of begs for that. Your starting pitch becomes the new tonic. It's pretty easy to do.
Yeah,
And Wilberg does that median. We all do that median modulation all the time. So no problem there. It's
choirs.
just so beautiful.
Yeah, choirs love it. Great use of horns. But anyway, we don't talk about Mac. We can invite him on a different
Yeah.
time.
Well, that's
Um,
just an example of I knew his and really had to work hard to not do what he did. And
yeah.
second guessed myself a lot, like, oh no, am I just doing something? Is this a harmonization that he used for this phrase? Or it's hard. It's better for me if I just don't know, just do my own thing.
So when does Christmas music start playing in your home? Is it pre-Thanksgiving? Are you a pre-Thanksgiving Christmas listening family? Are you only post-Thanksgiving, or is it literally on the day?
I am sometimes referred to as Father Christmas around people from my family or church people who know me. Partly just because I've arranged so much. I just love Christmas in all the ways. So I don't mind listening to it early personally, but my wife has dubbed herself by her own admission the Grinch. So she doesn't want to hear any of that early, and it gets old really fast. And my kids vary. My youngest is very eager to turn it on early, and then my other two kids, yeah, sometimes not. So I do like some covert quiet Christmas listening before Christmas. This year, I really started early because everybody was just so eager to just find some light and joy and hope and all that stuff that Christmas music brings. But I kind of think I started too early this year because I had trouble shifting into, oh, it's really Christmas season now. I listened so early so much that I was like, well, this is just like pre-Christmas listening. And now it's middle of December and I'm thinking like, is this still pre-Christmas? No, we're actually we're in the middle of Advent here and we're trying to think through this. And so yeah, I don't know. Maybe next year I will just wait till Thanksgiving.
I'm a big believer that the Thanksgiving dinner has to be eaten before Christmas music starts. I enforce this as best I can in my home.
That more power to you. Maybe I'll try that next year. I'll emerge a better person.
Is there? I just got to do this for our friends here. Is there a secular Christmas song that just drives you nuts?
Oh yeah. Um, I mean, the Christmas shoes song might be I haven't heard that in a long time.
I think
I
it's
think maybe
dead. Did it
it might
die?
have died. Yeah, I hope it stays dead. I'm sorry. Probably somebody loves it on here. That's great. You go listen to it, and it's probably somebody somewhere hates my music too. So,
Oh well, someone hates all of
yeah.
us. Yeah.
Santa Baby is up there too, and then
Oh
of
yeah.
course, whatever that one is, Baby It's Cold Outside.
Yeah. Everybody hates that now.
Why won't that just die? Like, it's still on
I,
the radio. I don't know how they're playing it.
I think hatred for the song is keeping it alive at this point. It actually is being
Maybe.
sustained by conversations about how bad it is.
Yeah, somebody redid it. My wife said there's like a new version where they rewrote the lyrics and like the man is a gentleman about it, and it was like, oh, you want to go home? Okay, let me help you. You know, we'll do what you want to do. It's your call. So
Kelly
yeah,
Clarkson.
maybe that'll redeem it for us.
Kelly
Who was it?
Clarkson.
It was Kelly Clarkson.
And
John Legend.
John Legend. Yeah.
Baby, it's consent out or something like
Yeah.
that. I don't know. So if we've been really fortunate to do some of your other pieces, including quite a bit of church music, but specifically some of your larger pieces. We did the Requiem for the Living here, and I've conducted it a couple times. I did it at my brother's school, and we also last Christmas did the Jubilate Deo.
Oh, nice.
And so I think both of those, I wanted to chat just a little bit about that because I mean, they're longer pieces. It's a foray for you into an extended piece. You're super smart about it. You're shooting for 40 minutes, which is a great thing for choir directors. You're doing variable instrumentation. Thank you.
Yeah.
And so if you can't afford a 60-voice piece orchestra, you can still do it. The multiple orchestrations are just so valuable. But I think the thing that I find most interesting about them is how you are being aggressive on different uses of texts than might be normally associated. I'm curious, I'm guessing this is important to you to bring new kind of textual ideas.
Yeah. For the Requiem, I'm much more on the Protestant side of things, and so that gave way more for me to aim at more at the living than praying necessarily as much for the souls of the departed. Even though I understand there's a way you can do that, even like within my own theology, it's fine. I'm not like up in arms about it, but I was trying to say more what I would really want to say, instead of just putting other people's words in my mouth, both musically and textually, like you're saying. So that influenced the title and some of the text choices as well. Honestly, when I got to the Dies Irae, it was just so long. I mean, if you're Verdi, it takes you 20 minutes. That's half of your 40 just to burn through the text of the Dies Irae. And it just said a bunch of things that I didn't necessarily care as much about as some of the others. So I just replaced that with text that mattered more to me. And I did switch around the Sanctus and the Agnus Dei, and I sweated about that for months. Thinking, like, this is just not liturgical order. It's not the way things are supposed to be. Are people going to like want to do this and then decide not to perform it because it's just out of order? Are they going to think that I don't know my mass movement order or something? But in the end, just the flow of the music really called for that. The humble and contrite prayer of the Agnus Dei needed to come before all that rejoicing in the song too. So I tried to just write some program notes about it to let people know, like, yeah, this was intentional, and it's been no problem. I haven't had anybody get upset at me. I think hopefully because the music just it makes sense. It's what the music needed to do, even if it's not what's been done historically. And there's precedent for that kind of thing. Forrest did his own thing with the Requiem text. Rutter, of course, did in our modern day. Brahms used the vernacular. Those are the big examples. So I can at least lean on the shoulders of those giants for simplicity.
Yeah, and I think that since well into the 19th century, composers have seen the Requiem as an opportunity, a dramatic opportunity to do something beyond liturgy, even though there's also that other tradition. You said something about reversing the Sanctus and Agnus Dei, and I noticed that, of course, and I thought a lot about it. I've long believed Catholics in the room are not going to like this. That musically, Agnus Dei is not a strong ending.
Mm.
And Lamb of God who taketh away the sins of the world, and then of course Dona nobis pacem, grant us peace. That the peace it's difficult to end a typical mass with an Agnus Dei in kind of a real dramatic way, because I think the text leads you toward where the liturgy is, which is not a big ending, right? Yeah. I mean, it is big, not loud. And so I like that you reversed those. Are you maybe a fellow compatriot on Agnus Dei is not a great ending to a mass?
I couldn't speak for others. It just didn't. It wasn't where I needed mine to be. So
yeah.
Speak to that. You're looking for support there, and I didn't give it to you. Sorry.
And I think what you did with and so to our listeners, if you do not know the Requiem for the Living, didn't hear CRS perform it, how many ever years ago, go listen to it. I just think the piece is so beautiful, and it's so moving. The Dies Irae movement, the Veritas Veritum. What am I making that up? What is the name of that movement?
Vanitatum.
Vanitatum. Yeah, just so exciting, and builds and builds and builds, and it's super rhythmic, and it's really great. How did you decide to use that text?
I had come across that before, and I had almost used it as a standalone piece for a different commission. And then when I was looking at the Dies Irae, which is usually Day of Wrath and Judgment, it's pretty aggressive normally. I thought, I don't want to do this, and I have this other text that I was already going to set in a really like angry, aggressive sort of way. It just seemed like a good substitute.
Hey, good question from Talia from the chat. What do you consider the piece that you took the most risks on, where you felt, and that can mean anything that means. Conversely, was there any piece that you felt was simple earlier that was still able to inspire you? So kind of two questions.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you've taken like some risks with the piece in terms of what you did with the text, or how you said
sure. Let's start with the easy question, which is the second one. Probably my first Noel. I've written two first Noels. There's a first Noel and a second first Noel. The second one is Festival First Noel. And of course, both of those came after Wilberg's that made me not sure I even wanted to write the first Noel. The first one, which is like 2009 or something that was published. I wasn't sure that was necessarily great. And it just seemed kind of simple and straightforward to me, but I thought maybe it said something kind of unique. And that's gone on to be, I think, my best-selling piece of anything I've written. Seems like everybody and their brother has done it and worn out their copies, and you just don't know sometimes, what's going to strike people, and that one just does for some reason. So that one's certainly inspiring others, even if I thought it was kind of simple.
We've performed it, yeah.
Yeah, good, thank you. The piece that I took risks on, I was looking over my Christmas pieces today, just in preparation for this Zoom. And so this is the one that comes to mind right now. I did a setting of Verbum caro factus est. The word became flesh and dwelt among us. And I was just kind of in an artsy mood, I guess, with that one when I was setting that text. And there's some aleatoric sections in the middle of it. And some just kind of leapy things that go on with the melody. And that's one of my least popular pieces. I think just because it is so hard and it's risky, and it's also a very sacred text, so that may limit its use in certain places too. But yeah, I took risks in that, and it doesn't get a lot of performances for it, but I still think it's a pretty good piece.
I'll look
The,
at it. I don't know it, so I need to listen to it. I'm curious about the aleatoric section. Were you maybe inspired by like Rene Clausen or something along that
no,
line?
I've done a fair amount of aleatoric things,
Yeah.
especially earlier on. I'm this weird blend of growing up in a small Baptist church with Baptist hymnody and very small, unassuming background, and then a whole life of involvement in church music and working with volunteer choirs with limited rehearsal time and needing things to just be as doable as possible, and yet a terminal degree in composition where I was writing kind of edgy, artsy, weird, out there kind of pieces as part of my academic training, and I loved it all. So it's hard to negotiate where I am on that spectrum sometimes, and there are times when I think a piece like Verbum Caro combines some of the spiritual and theological things that matter most to me with some of the artistic approaches that I've experimented with in other places, and sometimes just two things don't come together well like that. So it's just tricky finding the right voice for a piece and with an audience, and sometimes I nail it and sometimes I don't.
Your answer there really inspired me to ask this question. So we'll see. I also come from I come from a Mennonite background, very conservative country church, and then that background paired with lots of education, right?
Yeah.
Have you found tension between how you were where you came from and then making some of these other things work as you've become a composer and you've become internationally significant, and how have you dealt with some of that tension, if
Do you
if
mean
there's tension?
musically or more like personally?
For me it's aesthetic tension,
Hmm.
but that might not be, it's not theological tension. I think from my background, Mennonites are supposed to do things simple. And so dedicating yourself to doing something complicated was a little bit outside the lane for what my people are supposed to do. So to a certain
Sure.
extent, I felt like I had to reject some of that past,
Hmm.
and be ambitious toward doing certain things that, I mean, why would you do that?
Hmm.
Does that connect with you at all?
Yeah, for sure. For my background, it maybe wasn't quite framed as simplicity, but for example, there's especially growing up, I think there was a lot of kind of unspoken confusion about like the sacred secular divide. Like,
Mm.
are these secular endeavors really worth it in God's world, or in church, in worship? Here's the spiritual stuff that really matters, and all that other stuff, well, that's not really so important. So it's kind of a Gnosticism, or a Platonic way of thinking. Like, the spiritual stuff is really important, and then the secular stuff is like, well, that's second rate, second category. So it's been very important to me to pull all that together. And so for me, even theologically, like, all of this is God's, whether I'm writing some church piece for use in worship or a Christmas concert, or whether I'm setting Verbum Caro Factus Est, or whether I'm writing a setting of some completely secular poet for a choir that has nothing to do with any kind of worship context or anything. I think all of that in a certain way is equally important, and
Hmm.
I do all of it with the same sense of calling, and the same, my aesthetic is rooted in that theology, so that it really doesn't matter which one I'm doing. I have a little what I believe section on my website that kind of explores some of those boundaries and trying to eliminate those boundaries and just say my job is to make beautiful music for God's glory. Like, and I hope you enjoy it wherever you are on that spectrum.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer. That was very insightful for me. Thank you. I think I have some students here who are aspiring composers. I thought we might just finish up with, even though we've with some composer journey questions. Uh, let me ask you two or three questions. You can answer whatever one you want. Um, what how did you start to see yourself as a person who should write music for other people? You know, what were the influences that said, "Wow, I should write something down, and other people should spend time rehearsing it and performing it"? What was that journey for you? And then finally, how did you make that transition to the courage to stop teaching? I mean, you're probably still teaching, but you know what I mean, and become a full-time working composer.
Yeah, those questions are all great. I want to answer both of them. Um, I'll work in reverse order because my short-term memory is terrible. Um, yeah, as far as making that switch, I was teaching full-time and really developing a pretty good composing career simultaneously. And I felt like I was at 80% of capacity on both, and I really wanted to just go all in on something. And it just became increasingly clear to me that I wanted to really shine at one and couldn't do both. Um, so eventually, like financially, it wasn't a whole lot of a risk because I was kind of making equal or more income in terms of composing than I was teaching. So it wasn't risky, you know, it wasn't like I just leapt out and hoped that I would be able to put food on the table. You know, we were okay. And I knew I'd be able to teach on the side as well. And then Craig Courtney and Beckenhorst Press offered me a job working as editor there, which kind of replaced the teaching income as well. I love teaching, especially college students. I love working with college students, and I do miss that for sure. But I kind of get to show up and do the guest artist sort of thing enough to scratch that itch and to try to inspire college students and be inspired by them, by those interactions, and make music together. And so it's kind of like musical grandparenting, where I get the privileges of that music making without the responsibilities of going to committee meetings and grading papers.
No changing diapers. That's a good point.
Yeah, something
Ex-
like that.
Excellent. So, what about what inspired you to maybe see this as something that you should do?
Yeah, I never had a blinding moment where I was just like, I'm going to be a composer. It was really just always, I love music and I want to be making music. For a lot of my life, then that showed up as playing the piano. But at the piano, I quickly got bored with what was on the page, and my mind and my mind's ear and my fingers were always just wanting to try new things that weren't on the page. And for me, that line between, oh, I'm imagining something that's not there, let me improvise that and play it. You know, in a sense, a composition is just an improvisation that's worth doing again. So in a
Right.
sense, the composing that I do is just a way of writing down an improvisation, or maybe like 100,000 little details of an improvisation that were each decided separately until they all felt like they came together into a cohesive whole and saying, oh, do this now. You know, and then the page is just the roadmap back to recreating that idea. Or in my case, it's often just like a big list of the tiny little individual decisions that I made so that they all come together well and for the piece to be the best it can be. So there wasn't like some key moment where I was like, I'm going to compose. It was more just, I'm coming up with ideas and people want to hear them if I'm playing them at the piano. And then my ear was certainly drawn to choir as kind of a higher and almost purer form of music making than the piano. I feel like the piano is trying to emulate the voice in a lot of ways, and the voices are rarely trying to emulate anything else. They're just kind of at the top of the food chain as far as I'm concerned. So I just kind of wanted to be where the singing was, not just where the piano practice shacks were. And so then
Did you
go ahead, I'm sorry.
did you sing? I shouldn't have broken. I apologize. Did you sing? Were you singing when you were young, or was piano your main musical outlet?
It was always piano, and then I was always accompanying the choir. Um,
Ah, you were
so
yes, you weren't allowed to sing. Maybe an a cappella piece, huh? They'd let you.
yeah, no, even for those, I was just plunking out parts. You know, that's where I normally was. But, in high school, I got to be a part of kind of a regional choral festival, which is where I really encountered beautiful choral singing for the first time, and that bug just bit me. And even then, I didn't necessarily anticipate I would have some career as a choral composer. It was just such a mountaintop experience, and I looked forward to it the last couple of years I was in high school. The very last year, the pianist who normally accompanied that whole festival got sick, and they called my school and said, "Can Dan Forrest come accompany this thing?" So I got to accompany that festival that year, and I missed the
That's
singing. I mean, I did sing in that choir, but accompanying was even better because it was just like me and the conductor up
yeah.
there. I mean, truth be told, we all know that the pianist is actually the one who's leading the choir more than the conductor anyway.
Absolutely.
In terms of, in terms
My
of tempo,
spouse, yeah,
yes,
my spouse Nikki, who is somewhere on here, is nodding her head right now.
yeah. It's our dirty little secret. But I love that sense of collaborating, and these days that's my favorite place to be. I'm a terrible conductor. I don't belong on the podium. My music you're in better hands if you just put my music in the hands of somebody who can really evoke sound. That's not me, but I can collaborate from the piano all day. That's where I really have something to contribute, and I love like trying to show a choir how a piece should feel by the way that I'm playing and accompanying them with it. And I love having choir members be like, oh, now I understand how that piece works because I heard you play the introduction.
Yeah.
That's like the highest compliment for me. I love that moment.
Do you have a composer or a piece that you could cite as inspired you that you can think about, recent or long time ago? Anything?
Yeah, in college was where I really started making the turn towards choral music, and Rudder and Lauritsen were the two. I heard the Cambridge Singers for the first time when I was in college, heard those recordings, and that kind of sealed the deal on I want to be more than just a pianist. And then hearing Lauritsen's O Magnum Mysterium, that came out when the Robert Shaw recording came out when I was a sophomore in college. And like everybody else, I absolutely wore out that CD. I seriously must have listened to that piece. I think it was in 4 digits. I don't think it's safe to say hundreds of times that year. I think it was over 1,000. I just binged on it night and day.
In our profession, people our age can remember before O Magnum Mysterium and after O Magnum Mysterium. And whether the first time you heard it was the Shaw CD or you heard it, I think it was performed at National ACDA and it created a sensation. I don't remember who performed it. But that is one of those remarkable compositions that really turned our profession in the United States and made Morton, made him a household name. Yeah. You have anything, anyone else? Lauritsen, and I'm Terry's looking at me. I should draw to a close here, but I've enjoyed this so much. She nodded her head. No, we're fine.
No, I don't. I often point to those two. Beyond that, and especially these days, I try not to get too stuck on any one composer because I don't want to sound like them and have accusations of, oh, you're just copying them. No, that's just rehashed so and so. So I tend to listen outside the choral realm, honestly. I've listened to a lot of Oliver Arnolds these days, some Max Richter, kind of these modern minimalists that are doing really cool things with as few notes as possible, kind of reinventing ways that the triad can be used. That stuff kind of fires my brain, and it's outside the realm of what I do, and then I'm looking for ways to kind of bring that back in. So.
That's interesting. I think minimalism does impact some of what you're doing, and I mean, like Carl Jenkins has done a lot of that as well, and in a very popular way.
Yeah.
Where Philip Glass was not popular, he made it. How much? I'll ask one more question that was in the chat. Do you feel a tension between commercial choices? Commercial choices, the wrong word.
I know what you mean.
Business decisions and artistic decisions.
Yeah. It's unfortunate, I think, that those two they seem so mutually exclusive. Like either you can make money or you can be true to yourself. Either you can create great art or you can put food on the table, And I think every artist, every composer has to wrestle through those issues on their own and what they mean uniquely for them. So I can't offer answers for everybody else or tell everybody else what to do. But I can say, just speaking for myself, I picture this as a Venn diagram, and I teach this in choral workshops. So I picture 3 circles that all coincide in the middle. One is what my commissioner wants out of the piece that they're commissioning. One is what the market wants, like trying to publish the piece and sell it to all the other choirs besides the commissioner. And then the 3rd circle, of course, is like my voice and who I am as a composer and a musician and what I want to say. And what I aim for is the middle where all 3 of those overlap, so that I'm writing a piece for this commissioner that is also a piece that's in my voice, and I kind of wanted to write that piece anyway. And I'm also writing it in such a way that it will please both the commissioner and like the whole rest of the choral world, that will hopefully want to perform it, or at least some portion of that choral world that I might think, oh yeah, this kind of piece, maybe these kinds of choirs will want to do that. So ideally, I'm aiming at the middle there, and probably a majority of my pieces, I'm trying to do that. There are times when one of those goes bye-bye. So I'll write a piece that's just my voice and the commissioner's request, for instance, even though I know it's not going to be a big seller, like Verbum Caro. I know that choirs aren't going to want to do that. It's too hard to be mass popular or whatever. But it's important to me to work with that commissioner, and this is a piece that I want to write. Fine, what I try not to do is occupy any space in that diagram where I'm just not being true to myself, where I'm only writing, the commissioner wants to pay me money for this, and the market will pay me money for this. And so I'm just going to try to be something I'm not just for the sake of making money. That's where I feel like personally, I don't want to go there. To me, that feels like being a mercenary. I'll write what you want me to write as long as you pay me. No, at that point, I feel like I've sacrificed something that I shouldn't have. So I don't mean it as a selfish thing. Like I'm always going to have to make myself happy. Much of what I do, I hope, is rooted in service to others, whether it's the commissioning choir or the choral world in general, or people who just need to hear a requiem for the living because they're hurting, and audience members and all that kind of thing. But I try to not just become a mercenary. So I definitely keep an eye towards the business side of things. I need to keep an eye on that, and I work for a publisher. I help run a publisher. I'm an editor that helps choose and edit other people's music to make it as successful as it can be, and those other voices, all that stuff. So I'm all for that. But where it crosses the line into sort of becoming a mercenary is where I would say, nah, let's stop short of that. So that's
awesome.
That's the way I think about it.
Well, thank you so much for being here today. What a tremendous conversation it has been. Terry, I thought we would go out by playing the "O Come All You Faithful," but did you want to say something quick before I do that?
First of all, I just want to thank everyone for coming today, and Dan, Forrest, thank you so much. You are a hero to so many of us choristers, and we really appreciate hearing what you have to say about what inspires you, your work, how you put things together. So thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
My pleasure.